Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us. So earlier this year, a band called Velvet Sundown released this song, Dust on the Wind.
Dust on the wind, boots on the ground.
It's got a kind of 70s Southern rock sound, part Leonard Skinner, part CCR, part Tom Petty. It's brand new music, but it sounds oddly familiar. That may be because this song, and every other song by the Velvet Sundown, was created by artificial intelligence. The strange thing is, the fact that it's completely synthetic hasn't stopped people from listening. Right now, this song has almost 3 million plays on Spotify alone. But maybe the most unnerving part of this is that the music isn't that bad.
That flag turn with the tide.
In the last few months, we've started seeing AI art all over the place. Some of it is strange and original, pushing our understanding of what art might look like in the future. But there are also songs that sound like Drake,
with my ex, like Selena, the flex.
cartoons that look like The Simpsons,
Hey Homer, I need your help with something in the attic. Can you help me?
Well,
and short stories that read like Game of Thrones.
You're new to King's Landing. What's the first thing they warned you about?
They said never talk politics and never ask a Lannister who their real father is.
Noted.
In other words, artificially generated art that looks and sounds a lot like other people's art. That's because, regardless of whether it feels unique, the models creating AI art have been trained on the work of others. In most parts of the world, this work is protected under copyright law. So how is this even legal? If you ask the AI companies, they'll say it's fair use, that they have a legal right to use this work to train their models. But if you were to ask Ed Newton-Rex, he'd say it's theft. And Ed has more insight into this than most. He's a classical music composer who spent the better part of a decade building an AI music generator for a company called Stability AI. But in 2023, he had something of an epiphany. He realized Stability wasn't planning on paying copyright holders for their work. And he said he couldn't live with himself if he stayed. So Ed quit. And ever since, he's been on a mission to get the AI industry to stop stealing creative work. But that's going to be a lot easier said than done. Because if AI companies have to pay for all this content, it's going to upend the entire industry. But it may well save a generation of artists. Ed Newton-Rex, welcome to the show.
hey, it's great to be here.
So I have to ask, what do you think of that song?
I think if I'd heard that song 3 years ago, been told it was written by AI, I would have been, my mind would have been blown. I think inevitably, what we find normal shifts over time, and I've heard so much AI music at this stage that really I hear that, and the main thing that jumps out to me is the awful, awful, awful lyrics, which are still actually a marker of AI music, almost more than anything else. But I don't know, I hear AI music, and I can often tell. I should say, I don't think you can always tell at the moment. I think at the moment, already we're at the stage where in certain genres it can be hard to tell if you're listening to AI. But I hear AI music, and when I know it's AI music, I feel pretty disappointed even to be hearing it, if I'm honest. Because usually it's not in an interview like this, but it'll be on Spotify in a recommended playlist or something like that. And I can't separate, the feeling of the displacement of the human whose music I would otherwise be listening to from the music itself.
You were a musician and a classical music composer for the first 2 decades of your career and life. And how does a classical composer end up in the world of AI and working in AI?
I actually embarked on my composing career and my AI career at the same time. Both of them I started straight after university. And I've kind of kept both of them going in parallel, although my composing career, because I mostly write music for choirs, is not the most highly remunerative of any career in the arts. But I do it because I love it. But I got into AI really through studying music theory, which I was always incredibly passionate about. And with that sort of, I guess, maybe naivety of youth, I started thinking about why it was, this was in about 2009, 2010, why it was that no one managed to teach a computer to write music yet. I looked at the way it was made, the way it was put together, how you write music, and I thought it should probably be possible. And so I just kind of embarked on a journey to try to do it. And so I started what I think was the first AI music generation company. This was back in 2010. And I've been working in AI ever since.
What was the AI world at that moment? Can you just bring us into that a little bit? Like, what tools did you have access to? Because it's a very different place than it is now.
It was a very different place. I mean, the main difference was back then, if you told people you thought one day computers would be able to write music, they thought you were insane. Really no one believed this was possible, basically.
Is there something about being a composer that you saw a value in this as a tool for composition or as a form of composition?
I did, and I actually still do. Back then, I was also very excited about personalization in music, the ability to have music that reacted to what you liked and what you were doing and how you were feeling. This was an idea I found very interesting. But I mean, to be honest, look, it was an academic pursuit as much as anything else, in that way that, that a lot of, I guess, innovation in general is, the question is, what is possible? I think it's a very human question to ask what is possible. And so I think that was driving a big part of it for me as well.
So how did you end up at Stability AI, and can you walk us through sort of that moment?
So we sold our startup in 2019, joined ByteDance, which is the company that runs TikTok, owns TikTok. I worked there for a couple of years, and then went over to Snapchat and worked there for a bit. And then joined Stability AI, where, this was in 2022, so 12 years after I'd started my AI music company. And it was, really, I started my AI music company 12 years too early. 2022 was really the moment where suddenly everyone woke up because ChatGPT was released, and because Stable Diffusion and other image generation models were released. And I think people playing with these and with ChatGPT in 2022 was the moment when, the world woke up to the fact that AI was here and that it was going to be able to create in all of these different media types. And so I joined Stability to head up the audio team building a music generation model, which, was basically exactly what I've been doing 12 years before at my startup, just now with much, much better technology.
I can imagine how exciting that must have been. Like, you're spending 10 years of your life working on something, and all of a sudden you get access to resources, a whole new set of tools, global attention on this space. That must have been just exhilarating.
I think so. Yeah. I remember the meeting where our kind of head researcher, amazing guy called Zach, played me some of the music that the latest version has just come out with, and it was just mind blowing. Compared to what's live today, it's not mind blowing, right? Because it's moving so quickly.
It's all relative.
But innovation is exciting, and honestly, it's why when I see what all these AI companies are doing today, the speed at which they're moving, and in my view, the laws that they're contravening, to do so, I kind of get it. Like, I get the excitement when I talk to them, and I know loads of them. When I talk to them, I hear the excitement in their voices. They think we're changing the world, and they are, without a doubt. It's just that people like me have started to question whether it's being changed in a good way.
When did you first become concerned about the direction Stability AI was taking, and particularly how they were training models?
Well, I knew what Stability were training models on from the start. It was pretty open back then, and I had the flexibility within Stability to run my own team and to set our own direction. And so we built this music model and we licensed the music for it. So we didn't take what has become the standard approach in AI companies of just, taking as much media, as much music, as much art, as much writing as we can from the internet, irrespective of the rights in that and whether we're allowed to do it. And so that was what we did in the music team. And honestly, I was hoping, I wanted, honestly, I was on the leadership team, I was hoping that I could persuade people that this is the route the whole company should take. And, and I wasn't able to persuade them. And, so I think when it became clear that I wasn't going to persuade them, I didn't feel I could stay. And that moment was a response that the company gave, a public response to the US Copyright Office, where they had put out this call for views on, how copyright law and AI should interact. And Stability, like many other AI companies, responded publicly and said, we think it's okay to take everyone's work and train our models on it, irrespective of copyright.
So why do they think that was okay? Frame that argument. What's the best articulation of their argument at that moment?
Well, I think there are two ways of framing it. The first is a legal argument, which basically says in the US, there is an exception to copyright law that says some copying of work is allowed without permission. And you copy when you train these models, you copy what you're training on.
This is fair use, correct?
Yeah, fair use, exactly. It's called the fair use exception. It says, we think the fair use exception applies to AI training. And the creative industries say, we totally disagree. It does not. And fair use is nuanced, and it is judged on a case-by-case basis. And at this point, there was no case law that dictated either way what actually the case was. So that was the legal argument. And then there are other arguments, that the AI companies give. I think one of the most common arguments they give is, well, humans can learn from music and art and writing without having to pay a licensing fee. Shouldn't AI be able to as well? And that's one of the really common arguments, I think. I think it's an incredibly weak argument because AI training is totally different from human learning. I mean, it's technically a totally different process. I won't go into the detail, but I'm sure you can imagine. These are not brains. But even irrespective of that, AI, when you train an AI model, the impact of that is so much greater than a single person learning. A single AI model could theoretically decimate an entire market overnight if it was good enough, put hundreds of thousands of people out of work.
Well, in fact, that's the objective of many AI companies,
that is
to replace work.
Incredibly, the overt objective of some of these companies, and the, I suspect, secret objective of others. As someone put it to me recently, if that wasn't the objective, there is no way you would be seeing the kinds of investments being made in these companies that you are seeing.
Right. There's value to be captured in labor. Replacing labor has value.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I've been at Silicon Valley dinners, AI dinners, where the after dinner speaker has explicitly said, we believe that AI can ultimately replace huge numbers of jobs, and we are investing, for instance, one speaker said, only in companies that are trying to do that. And they have a lot of companies to invest in.
So those two arguments, particularly the fair use one, the other one's a bit more philosophical in a way, right? But the legal one underpinning this is ubiquitous across the AI sector right now, correct?
Almost ubiquitous. There are a few companies who have refused to adopt the party line and say this is obviously unfair and we think illegal. But in general, yes, the vast majority of AI companies, I mean, pretty much any company you can name has actually publicly said this, that this is fair use. Absolutely.
And you don't buy it. You call what is happening stealing of IP. Why is that? Can you lay out that counter-argument for me?
Well, one of the ways that fair use is judged is the impact it has on the work that's being copied. So if I take someone's work and I train an AI model on it, I'm copying it. So copyright law applies. So the question is, does it fall under this exception? And there are 4 criteria that you judge the for copying against in order to judge whether it's fair use. This is what judges use. Basically, in my mind, the most important is the fourth, which is what is the effect on the potential market for and value of the original work. And, and a judge actually recently said this in one of the court cases. He said, this is clearly affecting the market for the works that are trained on. If you're training an AI system that can generate at the click of a button a ton of books or songs or artworks, whatever it is, obviously you are going to dilute the market for the original works. It's just common sense. And in my mind, that renders, and I wouldn't say all generative AI training. I honestly, I think the fair use exception is a brilliant piece of law. I'm not a lawyer. I think it's great. I actually really, like, the more I've learned about it, the more I think it's really good. It's quite nuanced. Maybe some of these applications will turn out to be fair use, right? I think every case has to be judged individually. I think musicians have put it well, where I've heard musicians say, look, if you somehow come up with a way of using our works to cure cancer, great, right? Like, no one's going to object to that. You're not competing with them. But if you look at, a lot of generative AI companies today, art generators, music generators, they're directly competing with the people whose work they're using. And that's, why I've been fighting this for 2 years.
How do we know if an AI model is using copyrighted material? Because we can't look inside the model and find out. We can't even see the training data for some reasons we should talk about. But how do you know that they're doing this?
Well, some of them have admitted it. Usually it takes a court case to get them to admit it. A good example is the AI music generators who were sued by the RIAA, the kind of association of record labels in the States. And in their response to the court filing, they said, yeah, we something like, we trained on essentially all music of a reasonable quality available on the open internet, right? So people, they ultimately admit it in court cases. But I mean, without that admission, all you can really do is you can use the models and see what comes out. And I've done a bit of this. If you use a chatbot and you ask it to tell you the first page of Harry Potter, and it does, it's trained on Harry Potter.
Does it have to be? I suppose it has to be by definition, right?
It has to be.
Okay. What if it creates something proximate to Harry Potter? Like, is it, in theory, could it be pulling from like enough references in the broader societal discourse that it could,
absolutely,
in theory, recreate a narrative that's similar? Like, is that possible?
I mean, look, if it's creating a summary or something that's just quite similar, it might not have trained on Harry Potter. Absolutely. And that's why, the nearer the model gets to regurgitating the exact copy, the more sure you are. But ultimately, if you can get the first page of Harry Potter, it's trained on Harry Potter. If you can get, a snippet of Bohemian Rhapsody, it's trained on Bohemian Rhapsody, And of course, AI companies, they don't want you to find this. So they add guardrails to try to stop, that happening. The guardrails are, I think, almost universally ineffective. So you can usually get this stuff out. But I mean, ultimately, look, the simple answer is there should be a requirement for AI companies to reveal what they've trained on. I think that is like the lowest hanging fruit in regulation here. Incredibly, some countries are unwilling to implement even that, because I think we can talk about this, but right now I think so many governments are just in the pocket of AI companies.
I mean, the irony here is that the AI companies are using their protection of their IP as a defense against being transparent about the data they're using to train their models.
Yeah, it is pretty preposterous. I mean, the whole thing is, I think when you get into these AI companies' arguments, they break down pretty quickly. I think at the moment that doesn't matter so much for them, because their commercial growth is so rapid, that sort of people in government look at them and they get like dollar signs in their eyes, and that's basically what's happening. But yeah, look, these arguments are not good. In my mind, these arguments are, and what's interesting is that, this isn't just me, right? The general public overwhelmingly agrees with creatives here.
Yeah, it doesn't sort of pass the sniff test in the public.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's common sense, right? Like this poll in 2024 in the US, I think it was the biggest poll that's, asked these questions. And, the poll asked a couple of things, it's among many other questions. It said, do you think that AI companies should be able to just basically train on anything they find on the internet? 60% of people said no. 19% said yes. So overwhelmingly, like, the answer is no. And this is what AI companies argue. This is what they do. This is what they argue they should be able to do. It then went on and said, do you think AI companies should pay people to train on their work? And 74% of people said yes, and only 9% said no. So like in an 8-to-1 ratio, the public agrees with this, because of course they do. As you say, it's like the sniff test. I mean, it's obvious.
I want to move on to that, but I just want to linger on this how we know question for a minute, because I think you've done some interesting work in this space. And can you just talk a little bit about some of the experiments you've run with the music generator Suno, and how we really know here? Because I think we all suspect it. And I imagine a lot of these cases, because they're not being transparent about the data they're training on, are going to hinge on proving, in essence, that they're doing this.
The cases might hinge on that. I mean, as I say, like, in general, I actually don't think it's very hard to, to prove it. And I mean, so for instance, in April 2024, I ran some tests myself. I used two platforms there called Udio and Suno, two AI music generation platforms. And I just used the platforms and put things in and saw what came out. And, I heard bits of Bohemian Rhapsody. I heard bits of Dancing Queen.
You can dance, you can jive, having the time of your life. Who'll see that girl?
I heard music that sounded like Eminem.
Yo, listen up, this is Eminem on the mic, dropping rhymes that hit with all my mic. Yeah. I spit fire.
That sounded like Ed Sheeran.
On the airways every single day, melodies and beats that never go away, catchy hooks and lyrics that stick.
I saw similarities in what I heard. I saw similarities across the melody, the instrumentation, the lyrics, the sound of the vocal. There were all these similarities, and my view at the time was, and you don't want to go and accuse people of things, but my view at the time was like, I mean, come on, like, you got to ask questions here, right? Like, if you see this much similarity, you got to ask some serious questions. And then the record labels went and asked those same questions and ultimately sued these companies and put a bunch of examples in their lawsuit. And then, as I say, like, I forget what both of them said exactly, but at least one of them, came back and said, yeah, look, we trained on all the music of a reasonable quality available on the open internet. So, I mean, that's as close an admission, I think, as you're ever going to get. So yeah, so you can test this, you can run these experiments, but again, I mean, like, we just shouldn't have to. We just should not have to. And I think it's only because, like, frankly, like, the tech sector moves faster than the law. Like, and that's what it is. Like, law takes time to implement. This sector has a huge amount of money. It's also spending a huge amount on lobbying governments to its cause. So yeah, I mean, we're in this kind of this difficult spot at the moment where the law hasn't caught up.
You see it, the beginnings of it trying to catch up, right? And one decision that seems relevant is the U.S. Copyright Office recent report saying that there might be sort of some training uses that do fall under fair use and some that don't. I mean, that feels kind of significant, right? Because it's not making a binary statement here. It's saying there's going to be some judgment on, as you were saying earlier, of like what could be, how we could redefine fair use in a LLM world. Do you have any sense of where they're going to draw that line or how that might get articulated? Because I don't see it being articulated with examples. It's more a theoretical statement at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that report from the Copyright Office I thought was great. And I entirely agree with them. I think it is nuanced. There are going to be some instances of training AI systems that are fair use, and there are going to be some instances that aren't. And it comes down to these 4 factors, and you weigh it up. And as I say, I think a lot of it will come down to competition and how much competition there is with what's being trained on. I mean, I think the Copyright Office put it well. I mean, they actually specifically called out like AI music companies, right? And they said, look, what your product is fundamentally doing is it's training on recorded songs and then is outputting recorded songs that are going to compete in the same market. You know, that is surely, obviously going to be on the kind of least acceptable end of the spectrum, which I agree with. And so I think that for me, I think in a reasonable world, that is kind of what happens.
That's a big caveat, by the way.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's
yeah,
a big
exactly.
caveat.
I know. Well, but that's what I'm worried about, right? Like some that will be fair use and some that won't be. And you know, to summarize my view on the difference, I mean, I basically think that the reasonable position would come down essentially to, you know, the kind of market it's competing in and what that competition is.
And what it does to that market, right?
And what it does to the market. And but importantly also, like what just common sense tells you it will do to the market. You know, I think the way the law is worded, it focuses on the potential effect, right? It's not in my mind, you shouldn't actually have to prove an actual effect. It should just be, you know, if the common sense position tells you this is of course going to compete, because it's the same kind of thing. It's going to compete in the same market. Music's a good example. 18% of all the songs being uploaded to streaming platforms every day is now AI generated. You know,
18%, really?
18%. That's on Deezer. Spotify haven't released their figures, but it's almost certainly the same, or frankly higher.
Or higher, I bet, yeah.
You know, so I mean, it's just obvious. It's common sense. So that's where I hope it lands. You know, I think the danger. There are two dangers. You know, two things I think will stop it landing there potentially. One is, I don't know, bad law getting formed. You know, if sort of the wrong cases go the wrong way first, then suddenly it'll open the floodgates and everyone will do the same thing and everyone will point to those judgments. So I think some of it depends on that. You know, honestly, I think the bigger danger, because that I think can be sorted with appeals and that sort of thing. The bigger danger is just governments drinking the Kool-Aid and thinking they have to change or refine copyright law to favor AI companies. And there are governments considering that. And, you know, if they change the law, then, you know, then the fight is lost.
It feels like another countervailing pressure here might be other sectors as well. I mean, we live in largely an intangible economy where IP production is kind of the backbone of most value creation in the world. And if that can be written off or undercut in one sector, if I own a pharmaceutical company or any other sector that is based on the protection of my IP, that might be a little worrying to me, I imagine, to see an entire creative sector get wiped out.
I agree. I agree. And look, I don't think the entire creative sector is going to be wiped out by AI. I think a lot of it, would survive even the worst.
I was saying that to be facetious a bit, but you know what I mean, right? Like,
I agree.
It might worry me if I'm a board member of a pharmaceutical company, right? If I see IP bidding getting whittled away in other sectors.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think thankfully, from my point of view, there are massive, significant vested interests across the world in defending the value and the importance of IP. And honestly, that's really helpful. Because I think the thing is, what's interesting here is that, you know, often in the world of IP and copyright, you know, often it's kind of massive corporations against tiny creators. And that's the fight. And what's interesting about this fight is that actually everyone's teaming up, and you've got the massive dinosaur companies teaming up with the individuals. I mean, you know, music's a good example where Suno and Udio are being sued by the biggest record labels in the world, but they're also being sued in a class action lawsuit by a bunch of independent musicians. And basically people are aligned on this, you know, and I think that makes this very different to some other fights. You've got the creative industries pretty aligned that this is not acceptable. And as you say, I think you've got other IP-based industries that will say this is not acceptable. And I think beyond that, right, I mean, honestly, one of the things that struck me over the past couple of years is just how incredibly unpopular AI is in general. I mean, not speaking in terms of revenue or anything like that. I mean, obviously, lots of people are using ChatGPT. They're making billions of dollars. Like, not in those terms, just in terms of sort of public perception.
We're seeing that in Canada in a big way. 85% of Canadians want the government to regulate AI. adoption is at the
Wow.
lower end of the OECD countries in Canada. There's just a lot of friction in the Canadian citizenry of whether they want to use this stuff or not. And you're right, they're using it on edge cases, but do they want it embedded in their lives in every way? Right now, like the answer is pretty clearly no.
That's very interesting and honestly good to hear. I mean, I just think there are so many, to me, right now, look, I'll be really frank. I think the costs of AI outweigh the benefits right now. Like, I think that's pretty clear. I think, and different people care about different things, right? But, you've got the creative sector seeing their work, in their view, being stolen and their jobs being taken. You've got much wider job concerns where, there's more and more data coming out showing basically that young people can't get work directly because of AI. You've got people having psychotic episodes and committing suicide after long conversations with ChatGPT. You've got epidemics of cheating in high schools and college and I think people are just really worried. And I think, the way I've heard a lot of people describe it that I really agree with is it's this kind of like societal level experiment being run against people's will. And honestly, I think for a while now, the AI companies have really underestimated the anger that I think they're causing in people. I've seen that among creators. I mean, people are upset, they're angry. And honestly, I think that's only going to continue.
So let's stick with the creative piece of this, but how do we fix that component of it, of the copyrighted material of the creative sector in the use of models? What's your solution there?
Well, I think there's a pretty clear roadmap, and I think it's rooted in licensing. I mean, it's very simple. This is not some new concept. I mean, the same thing happened, around the dawn of the music file sharing and streaming age. Napster came along, stole everyone's music. I mean, again, like AI, great product. People loved it, got a lot of usage, definitely kind of made consumers' lives easier. All of the same things you could say about AI, but it was stealing to do it. And thankfully the courts saw that. And what emerged in its place was not a perfect system, not a system that I think is perfect for musicians in Spotify, but a system that's much better than, one that's based on theft. And I think the roadmap is there for the same to happen in AI. There are at least 20 or so AI companies who, take a fairer approach to training. I have a non-profit that has a certification scheme for these companies. So I know what they're doing. So it's possible. And I think what you're seeing is more and more licensing happening. Frankly, as AI companies get more money, I think some of them are defensively licensing content to try to stave off more lawsuits. But you're seeing more and more licensing, and that's the path. You just, you go and ask permission for what you use and you pay for what you use. And that's I just think it's pretty simple, and there's a lot of obfuscation around it. There's a lot of people saying it's impossible, but I think in general, the people who say it's impossible, one, haven't tried, and two, know absolutely nothing about the licensing industry.
That already exists.
And has worked very well for a long time.
Does it work now? I mean, I think that you hear the argument around Spotify licensing ultimately being sort of a race to the bottom in terms of rates, and it's hard to make a living within that ecosystem. And do we risk replicating a trajectory of a licensing arrangement that is already difficult for creatives?
I think things like Spotify are definitely not perfect, but are a huge amount better than the alternatives, honestly. I mean, one of the ways I look at this is it shouldn't be incumbent on AI companies to solve all of the creative industry's problems. The creative industries have had problems for a long time.
Lots of angst in creative communities.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like we shouldn't be looking to the AI industry to come up with a silver bullet that solves all of these, and I think actually that's some of the obfuscation lies therein. Like, I think often the AI companies will point that out and say, we can't solve these things. It's already bad, and that's irrelevant. I mean, I think that what we need to be doing is comparing alternatives. The technology for AI is here. So the question is, do you build AI in a way that pays people and asks their permission before using their work? Or do you not? And I think it's just so clear which way you go. I think a good way of thinking about it is looking at the other resources AI companies use. They use compute, which is basically chips to run the training on. And they pay software engineers. And on both of these, they spend billions, not just millions or hundreds of millions, but billions of dollars. And so I think the argument that the other resource they desperately need, without which, let's be clear, these models just do not work, should be free, is I think a very silly argument.
Are they concerned about a kind of canary in the coal, or like opening up a Pandora's box here, sort of searching for my metaphors there, that it might be one thing to support and license music, but does that then create a regime in which they are responsible for compensating all content, right? So I'm thinking of journalism, for example, right? There's some deals emerging between select publishers and large AI companies, but they're very clearly hesitant to extend that to all news organizations in the world whose data they have in their model. Is that the real barrier here to this quite sensible model you're proposing?
There's definitely one barrier. I mean, yeah, they're obviously very reluctant to pay. I mean, at the moment they feel they don't have to, and they feel they can get away with not. I mean, you see, I think in a lawsuit against Meta, I think you have seen at least one person, I think, internally saying, yeah, we don't want to license, something, because as soon as we license something, we have to license everything, and similarly in public announcements of, even a bunch of OpenAI's licensing deals, they've licensed a lot of content now. I mean, I don't think they licensed the majority of what they train on, but they've done some deals. And you see their announcements, and they say, they sort of, the deal covers all sorts of things. They're also delivering internal tools for the people that they're doing the deal with, and they're generally not specific about what it covers, and it's pretty transparent that is calculated, because they can say, this agreement covers all sorts of things. Training's only part of it. This doesn't show you need to license training data. I mean, for some of them as well, the liability here is existential. If they are found to be infringing copyrights.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. What's the implication of this? Did you have any sense of the financial obligation here, if there's a requirement to compensate for all training data?
I think statutory copyright infringement is per work infringed. And I mean, even at the smaller end of what's being used here, like in AI music, I think there are millions and millions of, songs reportedly being used. So I mean, clearly liability would, and I actually forget the exact number per song, but it's not insignificant, right? Per work. So, Professor Edward Lee, I think, put it well recently in the Anthropic lawsuit that actually was just settled, but he said before the settlement came, if Anthropic, lost, which he thought was possible given, the facts of the case and what the judge had said, they were facing potential business-ending liability. And that's a company that just yesterday was valued at $183 billion.
So you referenced earlier that governments are beginning to have this conversation about potentially reforming their copyright law. The UK has been, in many ways, at the center of this. Can you explain what the British government initially tried to do, what the reaction was, and how that's evolved since that moment?
Well, the context for this is that we don't have a fair use exception in the UK. So there is no argument over whether AI companies doing what they're doing currently in the US and the UK is or would be legal. It's just not. You are not allowed to do this. So the government saw this and they wondered, why wasn't OpenAI founded in the UK? And the, I think, totally erroneous answer they came up with, I think, was, because copyright law is wrong in this country. So we have to weaken copyright law to allow AI companies to do this kind of training.
The investors, the entrepreneurs, the researchers who will make those breakthroughs, they're looking around the world. They're choosing where to make their home. Trillions of pounds worth of investment at stake. The battle for the jobs of tomorrow is happening today.
Now, that's totally misguided for a whole bunch of reasons. You'll note that
there could be other reasons why unicorns are being founded.
I mean, Facebook wasn't started in the UK either, right? Nor was Google. There are many other reasons that these companies were not started in the UK that have nothing to do with copyright law. But so that's their starting point. And so they kind of came out with a proposal and said, yeah, we'd like to change copyright law to make it, to essentially allow AI companies to train on people's work without permission. We'll let people opt out, they said. So if you're a creator, we'll let you opt out of this, and they presented that as kind of, fair, when in fact, I've run opt-out schemes and no one opts out. No, I mean, you miss the chance to opt out. You run an opt-out scheme if you don't want people to opt out, right? Like, you miss the email. Like, no one does it. Less than 10% of people do it every time. Even the people who run opt-out companies now, they're AI opt-out companies, even they admit this, you just get low take-up. So that's what they propose, and there was uproar. There was total uproar. People organized. The creative industry's organized in a really impressive way, led by some really inspirational people.
Just to be clear, that what they proposed, that is the current Labour government.
British government, current Labour government. And they proposed this huge change. They said, look, it's our preferred option. They didn't actually bring legislation to the table, but they said that it's their preferred option for how we go forward. And there was uproar. I mean, you had, all of the major newspapers in the UK ran a campaign where their whole front cover was taken over by just the phrase "make it fair." In the music sector, I organized a silent protest album that brought together 1,000 British musicians. It was just recordings of people sitting in their empty studios in silence to show the effect of what this law would do. Elton John took to, I think, BBC News to say that Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State for Innovation, Technology and Science, was a moron.
What are you prepared to do? I mean, you said it was the Derby coming up, but are you not just as one of the most successful songwriters of all time?
We'll fight all the way, Laura. I mean, if it takes going to the court or whatever, we will fight this. And the government are being so stupid. I don't know who the tech minister is. What's his name?
Peter Kyle.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a moron. Sorry.
So it's a fight. There was a big fight. And ultimately what has happened, I think, is, temporarily pretty good in that the government totally underestimate. The government, people on the inside have said to me, the DSIT, which is that Science, Innovation, Technology department, is in the pocket of big tech companies, totally drunk the Kool-Aid. I think that's pretty clear, right? You just have to look at what Peter Kyle says. But the government realized that they'd made a massive mistake in at least announcing this proposal. And they have at least said, okay, it's no longer our preferred option, where all options are on the table. And they've started running working groups and all this kind of thing. And
which is probably the process they should have started with, right? Like, there's not obvious.
Of course it is. Of course, they should have gone and spoken to people. I mean, coming up with a preferred option that involved upending copyright law without running any kind of process was just mind-bogglingly stupid. But where we are, I mean, look, we're not in a much better position now in that the government, it seems pretty clear, still wants to do something. And so I think what you're going to see, I mean, look, we've just been on summer recess. There's been, Parliament's been out. But the government want to legislate this year. They want to bring in big AI regulation, AI legislation, and they want copyright reform to be part of it. And I think what you're going to see over the next 6-12 months is, creatives picking up that fight again, and potentially it gets even bigger.
An interesting almost slip there in how you phrased that. Like, I don't think these are AI regulations they want. I think that is AI legislation.
Yeah,
and there's a big difference there, right? Because I think we're moving away from that frame and we're moving towards almost enabling legislation rather than regulating the companies themselves.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are, I still don't know which way it's going to go, though. We have definitely been in a moment where the accelerationists, the people who want AI just to, be totally deregulated, have been winning. There is no doubt about that. But at the same time, I think more recently, I don't know, I think maybe the tide is turning. It's certainly possible. Half a year ago, the AI industry thought that maybe we'd achieve this kind of, incredible artificial general intelligence within 2 years or so, you know, timelines have shifted, and right now people aren't so short. 6 months ago, the CEO of Anthropic said that by today, essentially, 90% of software would be being written by AI, and that hasn't happened. So I think there is certainly a possibility that a combination of damp squibs of product launches combined with increasing public backlash, lead to more temperance from governments. I think had they legislated 12 months ago, I think it would have been accelerationist legislation. But I think it's not clear that that's what we'll get. We'll have to see.
So we have a new government in Canada run by the former Bank of England, head of the Bank of England.
Indeed.
And I would say they came in largely with that sort of fairly aligned with the Labour government in the UK on this, that this was in many ways, they were going to move away from a regulatory approach to AI. However, the one thing they have said they were going to do is copyright reform. And so I suspect we're probably a year and a half behind you in that debate. But this fall, we're going to barrel into that conversation as a country. We have actually also have a new AI minister. So the first time we've had an AI department in our cabinet. What advice would you give to that minister as he starts this process of thinking through copyright in Canada?
My advice would be listen to everyone, not just the big tech companies. And don't let policy be driven by hype-driven FOMO, because that's really what's happening, I think, in the UK. You've got a huge hype cycle around AI. You've got the government desperate to find growth somewhere, economic growth somewhere, and they think, well, we don't want to miss out on this trend, and that that desperation leads, I think, to just kind of crazy thinking and leads to poor legislation. Leads to the conclusion that you have to upend copyright law to build a decent AI industry, which of course you don't. I mean, so, my advice would just be to listen to people. My advice would also be to listen to the public, not just the creative industries and the artists, who I'm sure, if anything is proposed, I'm sure in Canada, like the UK, will organize and will be vocal. But I would say listen to the public, see what they think, because, I can tell you right now, they will not support the idea of handing Canada's creative IP to tech companies for free. Like they just won't. I would put a lot of money on that.
So even if we get to a place where models are trained on fairly compensated data, which is clearly, you've spelled out a path that I think is possible to get to that world. But I'm wondering if we should also be concerned about a world where that art on top of that fairly trained data is then just created by machines. Is that something you're also concerned about?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think, well, I want to be clear, I don't think that licensing training data to build a model solves all of the problems that creative industries are going to face in the age of AI. I think it makes things a lot better, but it doesn't solve everything. I think whatever happens, there is going to be some significant level of competition between AI and humans. This stuff is going to keep getting better, and people are going to find it harder and harder to make a living. And I'm a pretty strong believer that we will achieve AGI, this sort of theoretical point of AI's kind of perfect capability where it can match humans in anything. I think we'll achieve that in the medium term. And so I think this is going to affect all industries. And honestly, I'm concerned about that. I struggle to see how you're going to avoid essentially an incredibly rapid shift in the job market. The likes of which I think will be even greater than the sort of the Industrial Revolution, the likes of which I think we've never seen before. And I think this is going to lead to a lot of anger and a serious backlash. And people talk about the dangers of AI. People talk about existential risk. People talk about Terminator-style AI kind of deciding it wants to kill humanity or accidentally, exterminating humanity. And to be clear, I actually think all of these are reasonable concerns, and I think we should be worried about them. But I actually think a much nearer term and sort of more likely negative outcome is huge, rapid job displacement across so many industries and so many countries that, the ability to retrain just goes out the window. And I think it's going to be difficult. So look, I don't want to sound too down about it, but I'm worried about this. And I think we should be preparing for this now and planning for it now and arguably asking whether it's something we want.
That agency here is important, right? Like, I think that there's a real risk in underplaying the agency of people in this, right? And like, there is a question of what people want in this. And I think there's different scenarios of how this could play out, and not just what it means for creatives, but what this whole thing means for art itself and the future of art in society. And there's sort of three scenarios I wanted to run by. Just get your thoughts of what you think these mean for how we view art, music, and visual arts in our society. So the first is, what happens if this gets really, really good? So what if AI can create a piece of genius classical composition, for example, or replicate some of our best musical art of the past several hundred years? What effect would that have, do you think, on us?
I think that the simplest effect is it pretty rapidly destroys a lot of jobs in the creative industries, which I think in turn makes it much less appealing to learn to be creative in the first place. I mean, already as a kid, if you want to be a musician, your parents are pretty likely to suggest that you don't pursue it as a career, right? I think probably most musicians out there had that in some form at some point. How much stronger does that dissuasion get when, there are 10% of the jobs? Because all of those longer tail jobs that, were the way to earn your living when you got started, writing music for TV, writing jingles, writing library music that then gets used for this or that or the other, they're all gone. If you don't have that sort of safety net of knowing that there should be some work if you work hard enough, how dissuaded are you from getting into the field in the first place? And I think the answer is very.
I mean, that in and of itself is a societal or a human loss. I mean, I have a 12-year-old who loves music and spends a lot of his time playing music and learning music, and that brings something to his life that is meaningful in a real way. And if that's lost, I think that is a real loss for people in society.
Yeah, I agree. My 4-year-old has said on numerous occasions she wants to be an artist. She's very good at drawing. But I have conversations regularly with people who are artists, or who were until recently, and who've had to give up their careers because AI has taken their work. Their work was trained on by AI companies, and they are just getting far less work than they got before because demand is going down. So this is a real problem, and this is a shift that is happening right now. And I think that will be a great loss. And we do have agency here. And I mean, honestly, I think that over time, and probably in relatively short order, we are going to see political movements that recognize that. I think at the moment, the overwhelming political movement is, more accelerationist than anything else. But I suspect this won't last for long.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. So that was scenario one that I was thinking through here. So this gets really amazing and awe-inspiring, and that has an effect. The second is that, what if it just kind of stays mediocre? And you see this in all sorts of sectors, like maybe average or mediocre, but largely free and operating at scale is enough for us, right? For the user. And maybe when I open Spotify, I'm okay that like some percentage of the songs aren't real musicians, because I'm just passively listening to that content anyway. And I'm not looking for true art. I'm looking for passive entertainment. What does that do to society if we're just flooded with mediocre AI content?
I actually think if things stay the same, if the technology hit a limit, hit a hard ceiling now, things wouldn't be too bad. I wouldn't be too worried about things. I think for a few reasons. One is we could develop sensible transparency legislation, that did things like, and they've just done this in China, as of a couple of days ago, AI-generated content has to be labeled as such. So on Spotify, AI music, yes, it's there, but it's labeled. You can choose not to see any of it if you want to. Probably more
filter
people
it out,
do that
maybe.
over time. Yeah, you just get rid of it. You don't want to see it. At the same time, if we'd hit that ceiling of capabilities, then ultimately, absolutely, some people would lose work in that scenario already. I think the technology is already there, but not entire industries. And the people who did would, over time, I think, be able to retrain. I think society would be fine if we paused today, if we hit a ceiling today. I would feel pretty optimistic about our direction.
I wouldn't want to leave on a moment of optimism. So let me just give you one third scenario here, which is sort of prompted by something Jaron Lanier recently said, which is that maybe we're going to end up in a world not where we're replicating artists or pieces of content in kind of a broadcast way, right? Where an AI is creating a band or a piece of music and then broadcasting it via Spotify to us. But maybe we'll just have each our own AI factory that feeds us content. And maybe we will just get bespoke generated content that is tailored to our likes and our experiences and our particular mood at that moment. And maybe we'll get that for video and audio, and that will just be how we think of media, right? Is not as a broadcast thing that we share collectively, but is something that is just made for us in any given moment. Is that another leap potentially here that we could be on the cusp of? And what would that do to society?
I mean, no disrespect to Jaron, but I don't think it's very likely. And I should say I used to. I've been building these systems for almost 15 years now. And that vision, the vision he outlines there is one of the big visions that I had back in 2010. One of the big reasons I got into AI creativity, because I thought this idea of personalized content would be amazing, that understands you, that knows your preferences, that can really be tailored to you. But who knows, I may be wrong, but in general, I think what I've really come to see over the last 15 years or so is that a lot of culture is not just about the effect that it has on you. It's about the shared experience of consuming it. We will lose a huge amount if we're all in our own bubbles of creativity, of consumption, if we're all just sort of scrolling our feeds endlessly and what we're seeing is shared by no one and we can discuss with no one. And there has no connection to the people we love or to the people we're interested in. So I don't buy it. I actually have great belief in and faith in the future of human creativity, even in the face of AI. And partly, and this is to go off on a tangent, but partly because I see a backlash coming to all of this automation. I think these models will keep getting better. And I think what you're starting to see the first hints of is a sort of, I guess, a kind of new humanist movement in the arts where we reject what is or can be automated, a return to the simplest and most human creative techniques, a return to things that sound gritty in music and live performance and doing things in real time. And all of these things that really only a human can do. So in general, I think that the more AI infringes on these areas of creativity, the more that I think people will gravitate to the areas that it hasn't managed to take over yet. There is, I actually do, to end on some optimism, I think there is a decent future there for human creativity.
One of the things I find fascinating about these conversations about AI at the moment is, in many ways, it's forcing us to articulate much more clearly and thoughtfully what we think it means to be human and what we value as a society. And I think you're right that really hit home that art and music is a collective human endeavor. It's not an individual one. And that might be something that's hard to replicate in a bespoke AI world. And maybe that's a little glimmer of something to hold on to, right? That like we need collective experience, and therefore that is what we will insist AI provides us if we're going to let it into our lives.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing that we're learning through AI about human creativity is that a lot of creativity is the struggle. Not all of it. You know, there's art that people, you know, create incredibly quickly without trying. But even that in general, behind that will lie years, decades even, of work. I've written pieces of music that have taken me years from start to finish to complete, and I've prompted AI models and had songs outputted in seconds. And these things are not the same, and you do not get the same feeling of satisfaction. It should go without saying in that creative act. And so I think that we're learning this as well, and we're seeing that, you know, the output is not everything. And I think there is going to be a lot more focus on the creative process, which we're already starting to see. People asking how you made something, people asking to see the almost behind the scenes footage of how this thing was created. And I suspect that's going to become a bigger and bigger part of how we think about creativity.
I hope you're right. And thanks for talking this through with us. I really appreciate it.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Machines Like Us is produced by Paradigms in collaboration with the Globe and Mail. The show is produced by Mitchell Stuart. Our theme song is by Chris Kelly. Host direction from Athena Karkanis. Our executive producer is James Milward. Media sourced from BBC News. Special thanks to Angela Pacienza and the team at the Globe and Mail. If you liked the interview you just heard, please subscribe and leave a rating or a comment. It really does help us get the show to as many people as possible. Machines Like Us is supported by the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. Learn more at mcgill.ca/maxbellschool. Machines Like Us is also supported by CIFAR, a global research organization based in Canada. Explore their work at cifar.ca.